3 years. 3 years since Sylvia Ashworth last opened the front door of the old Craftsman on Dunmore Street without checking the window first. 3 years of the same 4 words, delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I don't do stairs." She said it to the man from the insurance company. She said it to her sister when she drove up from Sacramento with a casserole and an opinion. She said it to the physical therapist who called twice a month and eventually stopped. 4 words and a smile, and most people filled in the rest themselves, and Sylvia had learned that people were very good at filling in the rest themselves if you gave them just enough to work with. Then came the Tuesday morning in November, when the furnace quit. Bowen Caskey pulled up to the house in a white service van with a cracked passenger mirror and a decal on the back that someone had tried to peel off and given up halfway through. He was 38, broad through the shoulders in the way of a man who had carried things for a living since he was 16, and he had a girl of 9 in the passenger seat eating a granola bar with the focused efficiency of a child who had learned to eat fast, because mornings did not always allow for slow. The babysitter had texted at 6:47. "Stomach thing, so sorry." He had read the message twice, set his phone face down on the counter, and looked at his daughter across the kitchen table. "You're coming with me," he said. "I know," said Penny. She had already put on her shoes. The dispatch note said furnace, no heat, elderly tenant, handle with care. Bowen had read handle with care on a lot of dispatch notes, and it meant different things in different houses. Sometimes it meant fragile plumbing. Sometimes it meant a dog. He pulled to the curb on Dunmore Street and looked at the Craftsman and saw the wheelchair ramp that someone had bolted onto the front porch at an angle that would collect ice in January and become a serious problem before February. Whoever built it had used deck screws instead of structural bolts. He noticed that before he opened the van door, he had a ledger of unpaid things in his head that he kept very carefully. His late wife Maricella's final round of treatment at Providence Medical had taken 14 months, and most of what they had saved, and a portion of what they had not yet earned, and the balance on that ledger did not change just because she was gone. Penny's school shoes had been bought at a consignment sale in September. The transmission on the van had been making a sound since August that he was choosing not to think about. The Ashworth job paid a flat rate that was not generous, and it was the 3rd call of the morning, and he could not afford to spend longer on it than the paperwork allowed. He got out of the van. He went around to the back and pulled his bag. Penny fell into step beside him, the way she always did on days like this, close enough that her shoulder bumped his elbow every few steps, not saying anything, just present. He had never had to explain to her that some days they did not have a choice about things. She seemed to have arrived in the world already knowing that. The front door opened before he reached the porch steps. The woman in the doorway was in her mid-40s, dark hair cut short and practical, wearing a fleece pullover that had seen better years. She was seated in a manual wheelchair, the kind with the push handles worn smooth from use, and she was watching him the way a person watches an unexpected forecast, not afraid assessing. "You're the furnace man," she said. "Bowen Caskey. This is Penny." He set his bag down on the porch and crouched to look at the ramp bracket nearest the door without making it a production. The bolt head was stripped. He could see that in 3 seconds. "Mind if I take a look at this while I'm here? That anchor's going to pull free the first hard freeze." Sylvia Ashworth looked at him for a long moment. In 3 years, she had learned to read the difference between the men who looked at the chair and the men who looked past it, and the men who did not register it at all, because they had already moved on to whatever problem was in front of them. Bowen Caskey was looking at the bolt. "The furnace is in the basement," she said. "I know." "The ramp first. It'll take 4 minutes." Penny had drifted to the porch railing and was watching a crow on the telephone wire across the street with the sustained attention of a child who finds birds more interesting than most adults give them credit for. "Does it live there?" Penny asked, not really asking anyone. "He does," Sylvia said. "His name is Gerald." Penny turned. "You named the crow?" "He showed up the same week I moved back here. We have an understanding." Penny considered this with great seriousness and turned back to the crow. Sylvia watched her for a moment, and something in her face shifted by a degree that was very small and very significant. Bowen had the ramp bracket refastened with the right hardware in 5 minutes and 20 seconds. He counted them later. In the van. At the time, he was only noticing that the cedar under the ramp surface was beginning to cup at the edges and would need to be replaced before spring if she was going to use it safely. Decent. He did not say that yet. The furnace was in the basement. The basement had a chair lift on the staircase that was functional but old, the kind with a molded plastic seat that clicked when it settled. Sylvia did not use it while he was there. She waited at the top of the stairs while he went down, which told him something about what it cost her to use it in front of people she did not know. The furnace itself told a different story than the dispatch note. It was a 22-year-old gas unit, and the heat exchanger had a crack in the secondary cell that was not new. Not a failure that had happened this week or even this month. The crack had been growing for a season at least, and the carbon monoxide it was venting into the plenum was a quantity that a properly functioning detector would have caught sometime in the last 30 days. He looked at the detector mounted on the basement ceiling. The battery light was red. He stood very still in the basement of Sylvia Ashworth's house for a long moment, doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with the furnace. He pulled the detector off the ceiling. The battery compartment had a 9-volt in it that tested at less than a volt on his meter. He looked at the service sticker on the side of the furnace. A company called Presco Home Services had been here 8 weeks ago for an annual inspection. He looked at the sticker long enough to read the technician's initials twice. Then he looked at the crack in the heat exchanger again. This was not a failure anyone had missed. The crack was visible with a flashlight from the access panel. The kind of thing you note on a service report, or you choose not to note. He climbed the stairs. Sylvia was in the kitchen, which was arranged with the particular practicality of a person who has redesigned their life around a different geometry. Low counters, pull handles on the cabinets, a small table positioned so that she could roll close to it on 3 sides. A stack of files on the end of the counter held down by a coffee mug. He recognized the shape of a working life in that stack. "Your heat exchanger is cracked," he said. "The furnace needs to come out. How long has it been cracked?" He did not answer the second question immediately. He set his bag down on the tile near the door and looked at her. "Did Presco service this unit 8 weeks ago? My property manager arranged it." Her voice had not changed, but her hand on the arm of the chair changed by a degree he registered. "Why?" "The crack was present at the time of that inspection. It's been venting carbon monoxide into your house. The basement detector battery was dead." He paused. "The main floor detectors are working. I checked them on my way through. The levels in the main living areas are low enough that you wouldn't have been symptomatic unless you spent extended time in the basement." He watched her take this in. "When's the last time you were in the basement?" "I don't use the chairlift if I can help it," she said. So the crack had been slowly poisoning the lower level of the house for weeks, and the one person in the house who could not easily access that level had been living above it and not knowing. And the man who had inspected the furnace 8 weeks ago had signed off on the unit and collected his fee and driven away. "I need to make a call before I write my report," Bowen said. "To whom?" "My dispatcher. And then I'd like to make one to the state licensing board." He kept his eyes on her. "I'm not going to do either without telling you first." Sylvia looked at him for the length of time it takes to decide something. Outside, the Crow Gerald made a sound from the telephone wire. Penny's sneakers could be heard on the porch steps, a small rhythmic percussion. "Sit down, Mr. Caskey," Sylvia said. He sat. She told him, in the even voice of a woman who had decided at some point that even voices served her better than any other kind, that the property was not rented. She owned it. She had grown up in the house and inherited it from her parents, and had lived in it for 22 years before the accident. She had been a structural engineer with a firm in Portland. The accident had been a fall from a scaffold during a site visit on a contract job. The safety harness provided by a subcontractor had a buckle failure that 3 subsequent investigations had called a manufacturing defect. The fall had broken her spine at the T8 vertebra. She had been in this chair for 3 years. The property manager was a man named her brother-in-law, her late husband's younger brother, who had taken over the management of the house and its small portfolio of obligations at a time when she had not been in a position to manage anything. She paid him a management fee. She had continued paying it past the point where she understood she was managing more things herself than he was. She had been meaning to change the arrangement. For several months, she had not gotten to it. "Why not?" Bowen asked. She looked at him with the precise expression of a woman who had been asked a question that was more accurate than she expected. "Because the paperwork is in the filing cabinet in the basement," she said, "and the chair lift makes a sound that I don't like." He let that sit for a moment. "What sound?" "Like it's making a decision," she said. He understood that without having to think about it. He had a van that made a sound on left turns that he chose not to think about, because thinking about it meant confronting something he did not yet have the money to fix. "What's in the files?" She turned the coffee mug on the counter once. "The original inspection reports from when my husband was alive. The warranty documentation on everything in this house that Denny had serviced or installed. The original service agreement with Presco." She paused. Denny did not sign contracts without reading them twice and keeping a copy. "When did your husband pass?" 4 years ago. Before the accident." Her hand settled flat on the arm of the chair. "He died in the middle of a Tuesday. Aneurysm. He was carrying groceries in from the car." Her voice did not waver. It simply became smaller in the way that grief becomes when it has been lived with long enough that it fits in a smaller space. "I fell the following year." Bowen looked at the stack of files on the counter. "Those aren't from the basement," he said. "No. Those are the ones I could reach." He was quiet for a moment. From outside, Penny's voice drifted in through the kitchen window, small and cheerful, addressing the crow with great formality. "Gerald, I think you should know that I also like shiny things. We have something in common." Sylvia's chin dropped once, a short, involuntary movement, and the corner of her mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the thing that happens before a smile, when a person has forgotten for a moment that they had decided not to. "I can get the files," Bowen said. She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to. I know I'm offering." He stood. "I need to go back down to take the failure measurements for my report anyway." "Tell me which cabinet," she told him. He went back down the stairs and retrieved the 2 folders she described. And while he was in the basement, he also took photographs of the heat exchanger crack, the venting damage in the plenum, and the service sticker with the technician's initials. And he sent all of them to his own email with a timestamp before he came back up. He laid the folders on the kitchen table. She opened the first one with the hands of a woman who had built things for a living and knew the weight of a document. The original Presco agreement was in a clear sleeve in the second folder. She read the relevant paragraph twice without speaking. "There's a clause," she said. "I thought there might be. Annual inspection includes written disclosure of any life safety deficiency discovered during inspection, delivered to owner of record within 48 hours. Failure to disclose constitutes a material breach." She set the paper flat on the table. Her voice had the quality of a blade that has been taken off a whetstone. "He didn't send a report. I would have received it. I receive everything electronically. Your brother-in-law is listed as property contact on the Presco account," Bowen said. He had read the account header on the service sticker in the basement. He said it the way he said everything. Without performance, because the information was the information. Sylvia did not move for several seconds. Then she took her phone from the arm pouch of the chair and set it on the table between them, and looked at it the way a person looks at an object they are deciding whether to use. "My brother-in-law handles the service accounts," she said. "Not to him, but working through it the way an engineer works through a load calculation. He would have received the report. Or he received the call before the report was written," Bowen said. "I don't know which. What I know is that the deficiency existed, the inspection happened. No report came to me, and the contact on the account is a man who has been asking me for 14 months to sell this house." She looked up. "He has a buyer, a developer who wants to put condominiums here. The offer has a deadline. It closes in 11 days. The kitchen was very quiet. A woman who cannot safely access her own basement, Sylvia said, is easier to convince than a structural engineer who can read her own foundation reports. Bowen put his pen down on the corner of the table. He thought about the van outside with the cracked mirror and the transmission sound he was choosing not to think about. He thought about the granola bar Penny had eaten on the drive over because there hadn't been time for breakfast. He thought about the photograph on the timestamp email he had just sent to himself. I need to finish writing my report, he said. When I write it, I'm going to list every finding in that basement. I'm going to reference the original inspection date and the service sticker. I'm going to note that the owner of record contact on the Presco account differs from the property owner. And I'm going to send a copy to the licensing board when I file, because that's what the code requires when there's an undisclosed life safety deficiency. He looked at her. I'm also going to need you to not tell anyone I'm doing that before I file. Not because I'm afraid, because a report that lands before anyone knows it's coming is harder to intercept than one that's expected. Sylvia studied his face with the same precision she had used on the folder. Why are you doing this? He thought about it honestly, which took a moment. Because when I found that cracked heat exchanger, my first thought was about my report, he said. And my second thought was about who has been sleeping 20 feet above it. He paused. My wife spent 14 months in a hospital. I spent a lot of that time watching people make decisions about her care that were easier for them than they were for her. I learned to recognize the shape of it. Something in Sylvia Ashworth's shoulders, which had been holding a particular position for 3 years, moved by a single degree. The files from the basement, she said. There are 3 more folders in the same cabinet. They have Denny's original survey notes from when he refinanced the house. He noted every improvement, every system, with the installation dates and the warranties, and the name of every contractor who ever touched this property. Her hand rested on the folder between them. The survey would establish the chain of maintenance for everything Presco ever touched in this house. It would date the system, the original installation, the expected service life, the gap between what should have been flagged and what was. That's not furnace work, Bowen said. No, she said. It's structural, but you can read a basement, and I need someone who can carry the folders. He looked at her for a long moment. Penny's voice came through the window again, now apparently in the middle of an earnest one-sided conversation with Gerald about the comparative merits of different types of foil. Sylvia's mouth moved again, further this time. The thing before the smile became the thing after it. Penny, Bowen called. Yeah? Come inside. We're going to be here a while. It took them until late afternoon. He went to the basement 4 more times. She worked the kitchen table with a laptop, and the unfolded survey notes, and the printed service records, and the kind of concentration that came from 22 years of reading structural drawings and knowing exactly where to look. The heat exchanger photographs landed in the inbox of the state licensing board at 2:43, attached to Bowen's service report with every field completed, and a cover note that ran to 3 paragraphs. At 3:15, she sent a registered electronic notice to Presco's legal contact, to her own attorney, and to the licensing board's consumer complaint division. The notice cited the contract clause, the dated photographs, the gap in reported findings, and the name of the technician whose initials were on the service sticker. She did not send anything to her brother-in-law. At 4 o'clock, she called him. Her voice on the phone was the same voice she had used that morning when she said, I don't do stairs. Careful. Small. Just enough apology in it to sound like the version of herself he expected. She told him the furnace had died and the repair company had said it was a complex job and she was not sure she could manage the house anymore. She told him she had been thinking about the offer. She told him she might be ready to talk. He said he could be there in an hour. She set the phone down and was someone else again, almost before the call had ended. She looked across the table at Bowen. He had his hands flat on the surface and his face was very still. He keeps a property key, she said. He'll come through the back. How long has he had it? since Denny. She looked at the window above the kitchen sink. The light was going pale and flat, the particular gray of a Pacific Northwest afternoon deciding what kind of evening it intended to be. He was good to us when Denny was alive. I want to say that. He drove me to appointments for the first 6 months after the accident. He handled the things I couldn't handle. She set her palm flat on the survey notes. I don't know when it changed. I'm not sure there was a single moment. There might have just been a calculation he made so slowly that neither of us noticed it happening. Those are the worst kind, Bowen said. She looked at him. You've seen it before. In buildings, he said. The failure that happens all at once is usually the one somebody missed. The failure that happens slowly is usually the one somebody decided not to see. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the crow Gerald moved on the telephone wire. Penny had fallen asleep on the small sofa in the sitting room with her jacket balled under her head and her mouth open in the unself-conscious way of a child who trusts the room she is in. Sylvia had covered her with a folded blanket from the hall closet without making a thing of it. Mr. Caskey, she said. Bowen. She turned the coffee mug once. I have spent 3 years making myself very easy to underestimate. It was useful. It meant people left me alone. But it also meant that the wrong people felt comfortable. She looked at the folder. I am done being easy to underestimate. You were never easy to underestimate, he said. You were easy to ignore. Those are different. She looked at him with an expression that was precise and unguarded at the same time, and in the 3 years since the accident it had not happened to her often enough that she was used to it. Her brother-in-law arrived at 47 minutes past the hour, which was 13 minutes faster than he had said, which told them both something. He came through the back door with his own key, and he was wearing the kind of casual clothes a man wears when he wants to appear, as though he has not come from a meeting, though he had, and he stopped when he saw Bowen at the kitchen table. Sylvia, he said. His voice arranged itself carefully around the surprise. I didn't know you had someone here. He's the repair technician, Sylvia said. He's staying to give me the estimate. The brother-in-law looked at Bowen with the brief dismissive geography that some men use on other men they have decided do not require sustained attention. Bowen looked back at him with no expression in particular. He had spent 18 years crawling into the structural cavities of other people's houses, and he had learned which rooms to stay quiet in. I've been thinking, Sylvia said, about what you said last month. About the offer. He sat down across from her. He put his hands on the table with the studied ease of a man settling in for a conversation he believes he is already winning. He began to explain gently the appeal of the developer's terms. He used the word freedom twice. He used the phrase fresh start once. He did not look at the folders on the table. There's a service clause in the Presco agreement, Sylvia said. He stopped. Annual inspection requires written disclosure of life safety deficiencies to the owner of record within 48 hours, she said. Her voice had not changed. Not the property contact. The owner of record, Denny, wrote the contract. He was specific. She opened the folder to the relevant page and turned it to face him. Bowen found a cracked heat exchanger in my furnace this morning. The Presso technician inspected that furnace 8 weeks ago. No report was filed with me. The deficiency was present and visible at the time of the inspection. She paused. The state licensing board received our report and photographs at 2:43 this afternoon. Presco's legal team received notice at 3:15. The inspector's name is on the sticker downstairs. His initials match the account record. The brother-in-law looked at the folder. Then he looked at Bowen. Then he looked back at Sylvia. And in the rearrangement of his face there was the particular blankness of a man who has been running one version of events in his head for long enough that encountering a different version is genuinely disorienting. Sylvia, he said. I also pulled Denny's survey notes. The full maintenance history for this property is documented from the original build. She set her hand on the second folder, including every Presco service record from the last 11 years. Which means the gap between their documented findings and what they reported to me. This cycle is auditable back to the beginning of the account. She looked at him with the level attention of a structural engineer, looking at a load-bearing wall. "I'm going to need the property contact access removed from the Presco account today, and I'm going to need the house key." The room held that for a long moment. He put the key on the table. He did not say much after that, and what he said was not the right thing. And when he left through the back door, he did not close it fully behind him, the way people don't when they leave a situation they did not expect to leave. Sylvia rolled to the back door and closed it herself, and set the new dead bolt that Bowen had noticed on his way through was still in the manufacturer's packaging in the hall closet. He had installed it before the brother-in-law arrived, without being asked, because he had looked at the door, and the door had told him what needed to happen. Penny woke up when the door closed. She came into the kitchen in her socks, hair sideways, and looked at the two of them at the kitchen table with the uncomplicated assessment of a child who reads rooms well. "Did something happen?" she asked. "Yes," Bowen said. "Good or bad?" Sylvia looked at him. He looked back at her. "Good," he said. Penny accepted this and went to look out the window for Gerald. The crow was still on the wire. She seemed to consider this a positive indicator. Bowen stayed another hour to cap the gas line to the furnace safely and document the temporary measures in writing and give Sylvia the contact information for the County Housing Authority's emergency repair program, which she was eligible for and had not known about. He wrote his personal number on the back of the work order. He did not explain why. She did not ask. At the door, Penny pulled on her jacket and looked up at Sylvia. "Is Gerald going to be okay in winter?" she asked. "I looked it up once. Crows are actually really smart. They remember faces." "He knows mine," Sylvia said. "Good." Penny considered this. "Then he'll know mine too after today." Sylvia looked down at the girl with the expression of someone receiving something they had not expected and were not sure where to put. She looked up at Bowen once, and he was looking at his daughter, with his arms crossed and his eyes doing something he would claim later was just the light. "Thank you," Sylvia said. It was not the kind of thanks that closes a transaction. "Ramp still needs new cedar come spring," he said. "I know. I'll be back to do it." The van pulled away from Dunmore Street at 5:10. Penny was asleep again before they reached the end of the block. Bowen drove back across the city in the gray November dark, the transmission making its sound on the left turns, the cracked mirror catching and losing the streetlights in sequence. He thought about the heat exchanger and the service sticker and the 48-hour clause in a contract written by a man who had loved his wife carefully enough to protect her even after he was gone. He thought about the crow who remembered faces. He thought about a woman who had spent 3 years making herself small enough to be left alone, and who had today put the original survey notes on the kitchen table and read a load-bearing clause out loud with her hand steady. He did not know, on the drive home, what came after. He was not a man who spent much time on what came after, because after was expensive and the transmission sounded worse on left turns, and Penny needed shoes again by February. But he knew what the day had been. 3 weeks later, he came back to Dunmore Street on a Saturday morning with a truck bed full of clear-grained cedar and a coffee in each hand, and Penny in the passenger seat with a paper bag of things she had assembled to bring to Foyle, a broken button she considered particularly attractive, and a careful written description of her findings on Crow intelligence, which she intended to read aloud. The door opened before he got to the porch. Sylvia was already there in the cold morning light. Holding the door against the November wind, and the ramp beneath her wheels was the old one still, but it would not be for long. Behind her, through the hallway, the house smelled like coffee and something baking, and the light inside it was the kind that comes from a house that has decided to be lived in again. Penny jumped down from the truck and went straight to the telephone wire and began her presentation to Gerald in a carrying voice that woke 2 neighbors and startled a postal worker. Bowen set the coffee down on the porch railing and looked at the ramp, and then at Sylvia, and then at the cedar in the truck bed. "Ready," he said. She looked at the lumber. She looked at the morning. She looked at Penny, holding up the foil square for a crow who had tilted his head to a precise angle of evaluation. "Yes," she said, and she meant more than the ramp.